best time is, especially for an egg count. Now this is kind of important to remember. We want to take an egg count because that's what gives us kind of the level in your field where it's sitting at now, and then something to compare against across time. So the egg count's what we're going for. In order to get an egg count, typically the best time is right after harvest. The other time you can take one is, if you see a problem area in the middle of the season, you can take it then. But typically your best egg count readings are in the fall, as they're essentially there as eggs ready to overwinter for the next season. So this really is ideal timing right after the combine rolls, right before you run tillage to the field is really the best time to go after them.
Okay, so with the 2021 growing season, why was that sort of a bad year for soybean cyst nematode?
Sure, yeah. So 2021 being as dry as it was really across all of Latham Country makes SCN worse. It makes the expression of SCN worse, I'll put it that way. And what I mean by that is typically you see SCN pressure primarily in sandier areas. So those that have sandy spots probably know this more than others, that they probably see those yellowing areas or stunted soybeans more so than when you have nice, like we're standing in here, nice, heavy, black silt loam soils. These areas tend to kind of mask what's going on out there. Even if we have SCN pressure, which we do, doesn't mean that it's not here. It just means that there's enough nutrients and everything that's kind of masking. The plant has enough to take it up. The key here is, we're going through a how-to. I do have my soil probe, so don't be scared away. We are going to go through how to do it, but this can save you easily $120 an acre. So don't tune out if you're afraid to take soil samples. But so what I mean by 120 bucks, that's essentially that would be about 15% yield of a 60 bushel crop. Not everybody gets 60 bushel crop. I realize that, especially in this year, but you can see 15 to 30% yield loss without even seeing symptoms in the field. So it's critically important if you're seeing yellowing, stunting. Obviously, it's more than a 30% yield loss, but research across the Midwest and Upper Midwest has shown this. This is one of our biggest threats that we have is soybean cyst nematode. Easily spread between fields. Obviously, tillage. You can look at the maps and see how it's spread further north. North Dakota, I know, is kind of going through that phase right now where they're trying to figure out exactly where the heaviest pressure is and so forth with egg counts. So, but 2021 was an excellent year because the crop was stressed. So that added stress of SCN being on the roots, taking nutrients up from the plant. Remember, it's a parasite. It's not like the nodules on the roots. It's much smaller, but it's a parasite. So the nodules are symbiotic. They give the plant something that they need, get them nitrogen, and the plant gives them sugars. Well, the SCN does not give anything back. It just takes. It robs. It basically takes nutrients and sugars away from the plant so that those little juvenile nematodes can continue to grow and develop, and then they end up staying in the soil for the next season. So not a good deal all around, but 2021 definitely showed worse in areas. We had a lot of IDC, and sometimes these things go hand in hand in those spots where it may be, whether it's low areas or high areas, they tend to congregate in certain areas. So just a good year to go out. Hopefully you use the Data Forward app and you can kind of use something like that to pinpoint your location, where these areas are, because if you're having issues with lower soybean yields, you need to target I'd say the low-hanging fruit, and this is the low-hanging fruit. Establish a plan with SCN control and how you can help lower some of those egg counts and those levels so you can get back up to better soybeans.
Okay, so let's get to the procedure part then. How do we go about taking one of these samples?
Sure. So I'm just gonna go through and this is similar to any soil sample essentially. Not everybody has a soil probe, and I'll start with that. But this is a very handy tool. It doesn't cost you that much money. This one here is actually from a machine shop just north of us here in Clear Lake. It splits apart, which is really nice. Anybody that's used a soil probe knows the hardest part is to get the core back out of the sampler. So this is an option, but you can get soil probes even from JMC or other manufacturers that are good probes for under $100. You could get a small one that could fit in your truck, 18-inch probe. That's about 50 bucks. I've got one of those as well. But a tool that you should have at your disposal that you could easily go out when you have an issue in the field, whether it's SCN or not, and just get some cores for a nice sample. Because believe me, you can take your shovel and and take a scoop of dirt, but you will not have as good of results when you send in something like that. That is one scoop in one area versus taking 15 to 20 cores and getting a representative sample. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get a representative sample. And the key here, number one, is depth. We want to aim for around 8 inches, 8 to 10 inches in the rhizosphere of that soybean plant. So we're after harvest. We want to aim for that root area. So stay within, 6 inches or so of each side of the row. Go right down through that row. I'm just going to step on it here. And then the easiest way I usually do it, and I'm twisting soybean plants, but I always make sure I spin the probe. That kind of helps break that core off in there. It's a little easier at harvest time. My probe kind of came apart here, but the core is still the core of it's still there. Typically, I have a little bit better core, but there's a good 8-inch sample there. And what I usually do on my probes is I typically put tape around them, put masking tape or duct tape or something, or you can draw a line, but it won't stay there very long, so that you can repeatedly get to that 8 to 10 inch sample. Typically with nutrients we're doing 6 inches, but you can tape a piece of tape all the way around it, so you know when that hits the soil line, you're where you need to be. So the goal with this is getting in the root zone, taking a representative sample. Whether that's a certain area that you see, like behind us, we have a low spot that's been here all season. So we're going to sample that area. This is kind of a small area, but you may have a little bit bigger area. Make sure that you sample a similar area. So kind of think in terms of zones, a different management zone. On a yield map, it would be all the same color, essentially. You want to target those areas where it's similar in terms of soil type and productivity and things like that. And my recommendation is always take more than one. If you don't have something to compare to, the results are not as worthwhile for your time. So go out there and take a couple spots in the field, and take a zigzag pattern or something, depending how big the area is. You should never take a sample bigger than 15 to 20 acres, but take 15 to 20 cores for that area. So you have a representative sample, and put it in a bucket, mix it up well, and then you kind of subdivide that down into a Ziploc bag, or if you have soil bags, you can use that. But when it comes to SCN sampling, you don't have to have all the right tools. It's easier to have a probe, but really taking the sample is the biggest key. If you're not taking a sample, you don't have any idea what your egg count is out in your field. So you don't even have a starting point. You may guess, well, I have SCN, but do you truly know? And then can you implement a management plan to mitigate some of that? So yeah, the key is the probe really helps to have one of these on hand. It's a tool just like any other tool in your toolbox you should have. And to go out there, aim for the root zone, 8 inches down, and get a representative sample for that area. So if you had an area that you marked in an app like Data Forward, you can go back to that specific area after harvest, which is nice, walk right to it, and take a representative sample from that area, and then get another one, obviously, to compare to, to kind of compare notes and see which one, does it make sense? Is one area lower? Does one area have higher egg counts than another? Things like that. So, like I said, it's important to take more than one sample. Whenever I hear that, whether it's tissue sampling or anything, you want to have something to compare back to.
Do any of the weather conditions matter? Like today, and maybe we saw it on your sample, it's pretty muddy out here today. Is there anything we should be avoiding or trying for when we go out to do these?
Yeah, the biggest thing with SCN sampling is stay away from when it's muddy. When it's really wet, it's not a good idea. And obviously, if it's ponded or something, that's there's not going to be a lot of stuff living in the soil there. So muddy conditions are not ideal. It's not ideal for probing either. Like you said, it's much harder to get a sample. That's why they make different types of soil probes. But yeah, stay away from muddy or frozen conditions. Those aren't fun to sample in either. But yeah, those two are the biggest ones to avoid when sampling for SCN.
Okay, so you mentioned plastic bag. Anything else as far as packaging this, getting it to the lab that we should?
Yeah, and this one, obviously we're putting some caveats on here in the middle of harvest. Just getting a sample is probably a win, but I always try to make sure I do this. Don't ship a sample out on a Friday. If you're going out and sampling, if you can wait till Monday or something, that's best. That way it gets to the lab, because otherwise it's likely sitting in a UPS truck or something over the weekend, getting hot and things like that. It's not ideal. So if you can ship it earlier in the week, that's better, so it can get to the lab or get to the university or wherever it's going That's the other thing is where to send it to, depending on what state you live in. Iowa State takes SCN samples and does egg counts. Many of the university labs do. North Dakota does not, but they actually have right now they're trying to establish egg counts, so they're paying. If you live in the North Dakota area, you go to your county extension office and you can get up to 3 samples for free. So a lot of universities will do that, especially early on, but it's still not that expensive, usually 15, 20 bucks to have a good amount of information that you can use for many years to come. Obviously, it's just like soil sampling. You want to take, more samples down the road to see if you're doing it and helping lower those populations, but to get a first baseline of what's going on out in the field, just getting the egg count, it's probably, like I said, it's a win, and that should be your goal if you're struggling on the soybean yield side of things.
Thanks, Phil, for the how-to today. Thanks, listeners, for those questions on soybean cyst nematode. We'll be back next week with another topic.